Hello, 8th grade. We are continuing our read of The Greatest Treasure Hunt in History. And we are beginning, on the bottom of page 80. Bruges, Belgium, mid-September 1944. On September 16th, 3 weeks after the liberation of Paris, British Major Ronald Balfour, George Stout's roommate at Shrivenham, reached the Belgian town of Bruges. 4 days earlier, the 1st Canadian Army had taken the city in a dash along the Channel coast. Army bureaucracy had delayed his departure from England until the last week of August, but now, attached to 1st Canadian Army, he was finally at work as a monuments man, following leads on a brazen theft by the Nazis. Sitting on a pew inside the Church of Our Lady, with a few minutes to spare before his meeting with the dean, Balfour reached into his field pack, pulled out a stack of typed notes, and began shuffling through the pages. He was constantly revising his thoughts about how to explain to the fighting men why cultural preservation mattered. As he scanned the pages, he found the paragraph of interest. We do not want to destroy unnecessarily what men spent so much time and care and skill in making, he whispered. These examples of craftsmanship tell us so much about our ancestors. The echo of footsteps caused him to look up from the page, but it was just a parishioner. After watching the local woman light a candle, he resumed. If these things are lost or broken or destroyed, we lose a valuable part of our knowledge about our forefathers. No age lives entirely alone. Every civilization is formed not merely by its own achievements, but by what it has inherited from the past. If these things are destroyed, we have lost a part of our past, and we shall be the poorer for it. He found the right words, of that he was sure. Now he needed to find more opportunities to share them with the men. Moments later, the church sacristan tapped him on the shoulder. The dean, Reverend René de Schepper, was ready to meet with him. As they walked past parishioners on the way to de Schepper's office, Balfour could see that the euphoria of 2 days earlier, when British troops liberated the city, had already given way to the reality of the difficult road ahead. The hardships of Nazi rule had created shortages of everything. Despite that, the dean had thoughtfully arranged for his assistant to bring them tea. Field journal in hand, Balfour began taking notes as the dean shared the events of September 7th. Sometime around midnight, 2 German officers appeared at the locked doors of the church demanding entry. In the street behind them were 20 or more armed sailors from the local barracks, and curiously, several trucks marked with Red Cross insignias. We're taking the Michelangelo to protect it from the Americans, one of them said. Reverend de Schepper, anguished from just recounting the story, explained to Balfour, almost defensively, there was nothing he could do to stop them. He then handed the British Monuments man a postcard containing a photograph of what the Germans had stolen. Even before taking it, Balfour knew that the dean was speaking about the Bruges Madonna. It was priceless, famous for being the only sculpture by Michelangelo to leave Italy during his lifetime. The nearly life-size masterpiece, carved out of white marble in 1504, when the Florentine master was 29 years old, depicted the tenderness between a very young Virgin Mother and her Christ child. As he looked at the image, Balfour marveled at how Michelangelo had transformed a rigid, heavy piece of stone into a work that revealed the softness of human skin and the lightness of fabric folds. His genius had breathed life into both figures. Beyond the protective pose of a young boy standing between his mother's legs and her flowing robes, Their fingers interlocked. Michelangelo subtly foreshadowed the painful fate of Christ. Balfour put down the postcard, adjusted his glasses, and asked the dean to continue. The two German officers posted several sailors at the doors and ordered others to the north side of the church, where the sculpture had been placed in 1940 as a protective measure. In near darkness, using only flashlights to continue their nefarious operation, they positioned a bed mattress on the floor in front of the sculpture. And this, the dean said with emphasis, revealed the true evil of their actions. 4 days earlier, a Dr. Roseman had personally delivered the mattresses, offering them as additional protection from Allied bombing. Roseman was a senior official in Belgium of the German Art Protection Unit known as Kunstschutz. When the two German commanders in charge of the looting operation specifically asked for the mattresses, the dean realized that far from being a last-minute thought, the Germans had devised a plan to loot the church of the Michelangelo sculpture long before the actual theft. The only spontaneous aspect of their operation was the theft of 11 valuable paintings that had hung inside the church for centuries. The dean and sacristan watched as a group of sailors inched the sculpture forward and then tilted it towards the mattress on the floor. It took nearly a dozen sailors to lift and carry it toward the door. Once there, they had a second mattress on top of the sculpture, tied it into place, and loaded it into one of the Red Cross trucks. The paintings were put in the second truck. The two German officers and remaining sailors departed in the third. It took them 5 hours, but when done, the Germans had looted a work of art that had been in Bruges for 440 years. The Church of Our Lady was missing its centerpiece. Belgium was missing a national treasure. Reverend de Schepper had no idea where the sculpture was or how the Germans intended to transport it, presumably back to Nazi Germany. But he pleaded with Balfour to find it and see that it was returned to its home in Bruges. He then handed him the stack of postcards on the off chance that someone who might have seen the sculpture would come forward with information. It seemed unlikely, but that and prayer were his only hope. After thanking the dean for his good wishes and the stack of postcards, Balfour exited the church, positioned his beret, and found a nearby bench to supplement his interview notes. That the Germans had looted was hardly news, but the fact that they were still looting at a time when Allied soldiers were less than a week away from Bruges, when human nature should be screaming for a person to flee, not hang around and steal something as iconic as Michelangelo's Bruges Madonna, indeed was news. He reached into his field pack once more, pulled out one of the postcards the dean had given him, and took a long look. Reverend de Schepper was certainly right about one thing. Someone, somewhere, knew something about the whereabouts of the Michelangelo. Balfour was determined to find him. Near Verdun, France, late September 1944. Robert Posey, the lone American monuments man unable to attend the August 13th meeting near St. Lo, pushed the most recent package from Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAEF, out of the way, trying to find the calendar in his pup tent. With a towel wrapped around his neck and dog tags, he was about to take his first hot shower in 2 months, in a captured German barracks, no less. The timing of it made him laugh. Just days earlier, he had written his wife, Alice, pointing out how things that seem luxuries in the field would seem to be the most meager of items in civilian life. The meager items, a home-cooked meal, a bed, preferably indoors, and yes, even a hot shower were always things to savor. But not knowing when the next opportunity to experience them might come made Posey all the more appreciative. The monuments officer for General George S. Patton's U.S. Third Army, well, it wasn't really Patton's army, but try and convince anyone serving under him of that. Posey was sure he had the best assignment in the whole army. For a guy from a poor family raised on a dirt farm outside the small town of Morris, Alabama, population 500, he'd done well for himself. Besides, what he and his family lacked in money, they more than made up for in patriotism. Serving in the military was in his blood. A Posey had fought for the British crown during the colonial period, in the French and Indian War, served as a Minuteman in the South Carolina militia during the Revolutionary War, and battled against the Creek Nation in the War of 1812. 8 Posey brothers fought in the Civil War, only one survived. Now Robert Posey was in eastern France, a captain in the U.S. Army, continuing that proud tradition of service to the nation. Family tradition wasn't the only reason he joined the military. The Army's Reserve Officers Training Camp, the ROTC, was his ticket out of Morris, Alabama, and into Auburn University. With scant family finances, there was no other way he could have attended college. Architecture became his interest, and that in turn helped him get a job and provide for his family. He figured he owed the Army a lot. After his shower, back in his tent and dressed, he opened the package from Shape. Reports, directives, those were the norm. But the inclusion of photographs of works of art, they looked interesting. A detailed description of each work of art accompanied the photographs, all Belgian treasures, and summary information about their history right up until the time they went missing. Missing? They haven't gone missing, he thought. The Nazis have stolen them. 2 of the objects were so iconic he recognized them immediately. Michelangelo's Bruges Madonna, whose theft had been reported by monuments man Ronald Balfour 1 week earlier, and the Ghent altarpiece, certainly the most important painting in Belgium, and perhaps among the 5 most important works of art in the world. The sculpture by Michelangelo was valuable, but the Ghent altarpiece dwarfed it in importance. With no further obligations that afternoon, Posey lay down on his cot and started reading through the materials. Okay, see a great photograph of the altarpiece on page 87. We'll stop there and I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks so much, and I hope you have a really good evening. Take care of yourself.